Thank you, Program Director, the specimen herself. Your Excellency, President Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa, Her Excellency, the Commissioner Lerato Matamuke, the Commissioner of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, Ministers and Deputy Ministers, special mention to my sister and colleague, Deputy Minister Samantha Graham-Murray. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we opened this Indaba against the backdrop of a rapidly shifting global energy landscape. We reflected on the geopolitics of energy, on infrastructure as a backbone of industrialization, and on the responsibility that rests upon Africa to shape the global transition rather than simply supply it. Today, we turn from framing to leadership. The Africa Energy Indaba has, over nearly 2 decades, evolved into one of the continent's most important platforms for energy dialogue, investment alignment, and policy direction. It convenes governments, development partners, financiers, utilities, innovators, and industry under one roof, not merely to exchange ideas, but to align action. This year's theme, namely African Energy Pathways to Prosperity, speaks to a simple but profound truth. Energy is not an isolated sector. It is the foundation of growth, the enabler of trade, the engine of industrial development, and the guarantor of dignity for our people, for South Africa, and for the continent as a whole. The energy transition must be developmental. It must expand access, strengthen resilience, unlock investment, and accelerate industrialization. It must also advance continental integration through interconnection, competitive markets, and coordinated planning. These are not abstract aspirations. They are central to Africa's Agenda 2063. They are embedded in the African single electricity market. They are reflected in the 10-year infrastructure investment plan for cross-border interconnectivity. And they are reinforced by initiatives such as Mission 300, which seek to accelerate access at scale. But achieving these ambitious figures requires political leadership at the highest level. It requires clarity of direction. It requires institutional reform. It requires investment confidence. And above all, it requires a firm commitment to inclusive and sustainable growth. South Africa is privileged to host this gathering at a time when our continent's voice in global forums continues to strengthen. The African Union's permanent membership in the G20 has reinforced the centrality of Africa in the global economic governance. Our collective priorities around energy security, infrastructure development, and just transitions are now firmly on the global agenda. We are privileged to be joined this morning by a president who has consistently placed economic recovery, infrastructure expansion, and continental cooperation at the center of South Africa's national program. President Ramaphosa's presence here today underscores the centrality of energy to our shared future and affirms that it is not a peripheral policy concern, but a core pillar of national development and continental progress. It also reaffirms South Africa's commitment to working with our neighbors and partners to build a more secure, integrated, and prosperous African energy system. Excellencies, distinguished guests, it is now my honor and privilege to invite to the podium the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa. President.
Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Thank you, Program Director, the most wonderful and merciful, most understanding Program Director I've ever come across. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the Minister of Energy and Electricity for the invitation that he extended to me to participate in this very august occasion once again. Dr. Ramaphosa and the Deputy Minister, whom he calls his sister, have really, ministers never really refer to their deputy ministers as sisters. This is a new one for us. And I will not add a few other things they both said when I was coming in here. They have been truly driving the energy reforms in South Africa, and we'd like to thank them for the excellent work that they are doing. And in fact, the main focus in our country has really been the energy landscape, and particularly the reform thereof. And I'm rather glad that as South Africa we face the challenge of expanding our transmission grid. We are having a number of people here. I believe there are innovators here, there are financiers, there are bankers, and as I look around, my eyesight tends to fail me sometimes, but my smell doesn't fail me. I smell money. I can just smell money, and I'm so glad that the Financiers Minister Ramaphosa are here, and your great challenge of 450 billion rand will be well looked after. Commissioner Mataboge, also thank you very much for bringing the message from the AU. What I can say about Commissioner Mataboge, she operates obviously at the higher body on our continent, and because they encompass the whole continent, we pay homage to them. What I can say, which you may not know, is that what she says, she implements, she delivers. And I was listening very carefully to what she was saying here, knowing that every word that sort of drops from her lips is something that you can rely on, and she will live up to it and deliver. I say so advisedly because when the position of the Commissioner for Infrastructure was open at the AU, she raised her hand and said, Mr. President, I'd like to expand my career horizons and come from trade industry and competition department and go and serve the continent. And she said, what I need is support from my own country, because everyone else who's competing for that position is supported from their country. And so we agreed. Now, at the very last moment, there was a lot of competition. And she said to me, Mr. President, if I win this position, I promise you, I am going to buy you a packet of crisps. Now, here at home, we call it Simba chips, a packet of crisps. And so the campaign worked. She was elected. And I was sitting in the AU Assembly Hall. The debates go on all day. You hardly ever get time to go and have lunch or anything. And there she comes, walking gently down the stairs with a packet of chips. And she put it on my table and said, "Mr. President, I told you I would deliver, and here is your packet of chips." So she's a commissioner now at the AU level. Do listen to her carefully, but a lady who will deliver what she says she will do. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank you once again, Minister, and those who have arranged this conference. I thank you because this is a very important conference in the life of our continent, in the life of each of the countries that are here. And I want to extend my greetings to the various ministers of energy and electricity or whatever who have graced this occasion from our continent. We thank you dearly. We'd like to extend our gratitude to you for being here. The topic that you are dealing with today, as you did even the previous year, is a very important one. And as I welcome you, which could have been done yesterday, we thank you for being here. This Indaba is in many ways an opportunity to harness our collective efforts as the people of this continent towards realizing an Africa that meets its needs for reliable energy while becoming resilient and competitive when it comes to the exporting of energy in a rapidly changing global market. There has never been a better time and opportunity for Africa to advance its energy security, resilience, and sustainability. Now, with its abundant natural resources, our continent holds immense potential for energy generation. We hold some 60% of the solar energy in the world. Alongside substantial oil and gas reserves, Africa has enormous and abundant solar resources, wind corridors, and major river systems. There is an abundance of another element which the world has now woken up to and requires from our continent, and those are critical minerals between the African soil. These are minerals that are being sought globally for technological applications, including in energy. Yet, alongside this massive natural wealth, Africa experiences energy poverty. More than 600 million of our fellow citizens on this continent do not have access to electricity, according to the International Energy Agency. And this has now become common cause as a number of institutions keep referring to this. Every day without reliable power translates into what I would call lost production, interrupted services, constrained investment, and reduced opportunity for the people of our continent. This energy gap exists in a context of a growing continental population, rising urbanization, and renewed efforts to industrialize and integrate into the global economy. The ambition to be greater than we are is there, but what holds us back is our energy deficit. This environment, access to reliable electricity is a competitive differentiator. Industrialization cannot take place without secure supply chains, resilient villages, towns and cities, and reliable as well as affordable, scalable energy. Now, historically, much of our continent's energy infrastructure was built on severe and also to serve extractive models, to the extent that it was built in various nodes on our continent. It was just to extract those products that were needed and to cut them off to other locales in the world. Power systems were developed around enclaves of production rather than around broad-based development for the area and for the country. This legacy still influences the geography of opportunity on our continent. It explains why, even where resources exist, the systems required to translate resources into prosperity have remained uneven. The task now is to build a different kind of system, one that connects Africa to itself and one that allows our economies to grow together rather than apart, and much worse, rather than on their own on an insular basis. The African Union's Agenda 2063 recognizes that Africa's development must rest on modern infrastructure, including energy systems that are integrated, reliable, and capable of supporting industrial transformation, apart from supporting the livelihoods of Africans, apart from ensuring that when the children of our continent study, they no longer study with candlelight. Energy is not a luxury. Energy is a must on our continent, and it must be seen as such. When electricity started, for instance, or better still, when it was spread here in South Africa to the black population, or if you want to know the history of our own country, which was still under apartheid rule, well, colonial rule first and apartheid rule, they ensured that electricity was just reserved for white people, and black people didn't have electricity. So when it finally was spread even to the townships first, not even to the rural areas, as they connected, it was a luxury. We had never seen electricity. And I remember this distinctly in my lifetime in Soweto. When electricity arrived, it was like a real luxury. But it has stopped being a luxury. It's an absolute necessity in the lives of all South Africans. And that is why here in South Africa, government, the democratic government, made it a point to spread electricity throughout the country. And today, 93% of South African households have electricity. It was a determined policy direction. Because whilst it was a luxury for the white population, for us, the majority of the people here, it became a necessity to support our lives, to support children who were studying, and also to drive the economy of the country, particularly the economy that was being driven by black people, which had been held back because of lack of a key driver such as electricity. This places energy at the center because it understands that without energy, the broader aspirations of development, of integration on the African continent, of addition and inclusion will remain constrained. So the promise of Agenda 2063 says, but it is also about equity, that there must be equality. We cannot have a situation where 600 million Africans on our continent do not have access to electricity, and the rest of us have. That gives rise to inequality. And equity and equality is one of those fundamental values and principles that all of us as Africans must embrace and make sure that our leaders, our policy prescripts address this issue with the urgency that it is needed. Productive assets enables industry. It enables progress. It supports competitive enterprises. And more importantly, it improves lives and it creates jobs at scale. Productive access that allows African economies to move beyond the export of raw materials. And I often say, when you say raw materials, in actual fact, it's a euphemism. What we are exporting is rock, stone, dust, and soil. That's what we are carting out. This valuable resource that has been handed down by Providence and by our forebears, we export it in stones, rock, soil, and dust. We now need to move towards creating value out of those wonderful endowments that we've been given. This is access that supports modern public services, strengthens human development and outcomes, and reduces the costs of doing business as well. These outcomes depend on transmission and regional integration that allow power to move and resources to be shared. And it's wonderful to hear my sister saying, Africa as our continent would like a fully integrated electricity system where we are able to trade electricity on an interchangeable basis. Across Africa, the logic of integration is already visible in the work of regional power pools and cross-border interconnectors. It's already started happening. We now need to continentalize it. These allow hydropower, solar power, gas, and storage to support one another across borders and create a pathway to a more efficient and continental system. An integrated system allows resources to be used more efficiently and for variable resources to be balanced across the geography of our continent. An integrated system enables a more competitive market and spreads risk. Competitive markets are important because you spread your risk, and as you spread your risk, you balance your energy spread in the country, and it becomes much more reliable. When one fails, the other one kicks in. In this way, integration supports both affordability and reliability, which are essential to industrial competitiveness. Now, the 10-year Africa Energy Infrastructure Investment Plan that was inaugurated under South Africa's G20 presidency is a deliberate effort to move from a fragmented number of initiatives to a coordinated platform that can mobilize investment at scale. And that is why I'm so pleased that there are many people here. The plan recognizes that Africa's energy needs are too large to be met by incremental projects. There needs to be a coherent pipeline of bankable investments supported by credible institutions, and there should be predictable regulation and partnerships. Now, the regulatory framework needs to be so well crafted and calibrated that as investors come to our continent, they should have certainty of what the regulations are going to be. And this integration we're talking about will help to address precisely that. Infrastructure at its scale depends on financial systems that are aligned with the long-term developmental agenda or ambitions of countries. This is because energy assets require large upfront capital, long construction periods, and stable revenue over many years. But they also require policy certainty in the various locales where it will be installed. Public finance cannot fund the full scale of Africa's infrastructure needs on its own, but it can play a catalytic role in project preparation, credit enhancement, and risk reduction. There aren't many countries on our continent who, from their fiscus, would be able to dole out money for big-ticket energy projects. And that is why the private sector, financial entities in the world, DFIs and others, and banks and so on, needs to come in, because they will be investing in an economic asset, not so much as a social asset. Social assets need, or social infrastructure, are the ones that public sector or your commercial or economic infrastructure assets where money is needed, because they generate their own income. Now, the significance of the 10-year Africa Energy Infrastructure Investment Plan lies in its ability to organize the pipeline of projects in a manner that is credible to financiers and valuable to economies. Now, Minister Ramaphosa, Dr. Ramaphosa, has, even before he came into this position, spent a considerable amount of time working in Infrastructure South Africa, where they were packaging projects together and making projects bankable and working on project preparation. So in him, we have a reservoir of great knowledge, great capability that spans the two areas of execution. Africa's energy agenda must be linked to an industrial agenda. And that's precisely where he is now also operating, where he is also helping industrial entities that require the bridge of moving beyond their ambitions, their challenges, and final execution. Now, when this continent speaks about critical minerals, it must also speak about beneficiation, value addition. When it speaks about renewable resources, it must also speak about local manufacturing capacity, the skills development, and the setting up of industrial clusters. Now, at the G20, and we started the conversation at the G7 when it met in Europe. We carried on with it when we were in Canada as a guest of the Canadian government during the G7. And there we argued that it is important for the countries in the global south, as the countries in the global north require their minerals, that those minerals should no longer be carted out of countries in the global south as stone, dust, and soil. That beneficiation must happen in the area where those are extracted. It was accepted. And then we solidified that position at the G20 here, well, in Johannesburg. It was broadly accepted. And we were rather pleased that the envelope that we had started to push much earlier on our African continent, we were at the G20 here in South Africa able to have it accepted. It is now globally accepted that when there is extraction of minerals, beneficiation or value add must now happen at the locale where they are extracted, so that the communities must benefit. It was not an easy argument to push, just as the issue of vaccines was also difficult during COVID. You may recall that during COVID, it was the countries in the global north who had developed the vaccines, save for China. They had developed their own vaccines, and when us in the global south needed them, they were in short supply. And we finally decided that we now needed to manufacture our own vaccines. And we went together with India, South Africa and India went to the WTO to go and argue the case that we need to be given the IP, even if it was for a set period, to be able to appropriate the IP that they had to develop our own vaccines and have them manufactured in our own countries. The resistance was unbelievable. Unbelievable resistance. The case continues. However, concessions were made, and we finally got agreement that, yes, we should be able to develop and manufacture our own vaccines in the global south. That process has now started, and now Africa now has a number of centers where we are now developing vaccines. That is progress that we want to see, make sure that we are integrated into the world economy. And one of the key drivers in this was that we did not want Africa to be left behind. And when COVID descended on all of us in the world, we realized that unless we woke up, we would be left behind. They would develop vaccines, and much as we were doing research to find out what causes vaccines, the various strains, when it comes to vaccines, we would be left way behind. And I said, I don't want us to be an arm and a leg behind. If we are behind, it must just be an elbow, just one elbow behind, and catch up with them. And now we are catching up with them, because Africa can no longer be left behind. We cannot be a stepchild any longer in all these developments. So when it comes to energy, when we speak about investment, it must be about institutions that can deliver projects on time, within costs, and also with quality. Now, for the energy transition in Africa to be just and inclusive, it must support development and enable industrial growth. And we insist on a just energy transition because the colonial and the apartheid electricity infrastructure was constructed in such a way that unless we made it just, it would leave those who are living in a particular area completely impoverished and ignored. So energy transition must therefore be just. It must take into account the needs of the local people so that as we transition, say, from fossil fuels, we are able to move with our people so that they can see that the new energy source that we are now embarking on also benefits them and it does not leave them destitute. The Africa Energy Indaba should be about encouraging partnerships that build confidence, that the projects will be delivered with integrity. And that is why the just energy transition for us is important. This confidence relies on planning institutions that can anticipate demand, but it also relies on regulators that can balance investor certainty with public interest. Credibility needs to be built through utilities and system operators that can operate networks much more securely, and also public finance institutions well, that everybody becomes a winner. Now, complex infrastructure programs succeed when actions match the words. When what we say is finally coupled with what we do. As I said, to be a commissioner at the AU level, I will give you a packet of crisps. That is how you match that ambition and you make delivery. I am a living witness to that. Crisps were delivered to me having made a promise. Africa needs to be known not only for its ambition, but actually it needs to be known for implementation. Now, I'd like this analogy that I've painted to be taken to business schools so that people should be taught about how a wish is made and how delivery is made. And you can make it as simple as saying, you do this for me, and I will give you crisps or a packet of peanuts. And that should be studied thoroughly at even Harvard. The future we seek is one in which Africa is connected by infrastructure. It should also be aligned by policy, but it should also be strengthened by shared investment. Now, we now need to go beyond just talking. We now need to say, from a policy point of view, we may be stating our ambitions here. The policy processes are now being put firmly in place. They are being solidified. We are getting better and better at policy, and we now want implementation. In such a future, energy becomes a bridge between regions. It becomes a platform for industrial corridors and a foundation for prosperity. Now, this event is taking place at a time of heightened volatility in the global energy markets. Africa is already experiencing the impact of escalating conflict in the Middle East, with strains on supply chains and higher energy prices. Now we are going to be a victim of conflicts that are taking place far away from where we are. As we have seen with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and during the COVID-19 pandemic, shifting geopolitical sands underscore the vulnerabilities for regional and continental energy security and diversification. This is when we need to wake up, as we have had to all wake up in the light of what was announced during Liberation Day, when tariffs were applied across many countries in the world. What did that do? It woke us all up, and we realized that we now need to diversify our market space. And that is what South Africa is doing right now. We are broadening our market space as a result of the tariff onslaught that has been unleashed on us. So similarly, what is now unfolding in the Middle East when it comes to energy sources, we now need to wake up and say, Africa, wake up and be more reliant. As such, this Indaba is timely and strategic. It is an opportunity to position our continent in a rapidly changing geopolitical context. Africa has what it needs to succeed. It has the resources, it has people, it has growing institutions, and the institutional capacity of our continent keeps on growing, expanding, and the cooperation levels are also broadening. The remaining task is to match this potential with sustained implementation, to translate plans into projects, and to turn projects into reliable power that supports industry, jobs, and that brings dignity to the people of our continent. The present moment, therefore, calls for unity of effort. It calls for partnerships that recognize that Africa's growth is not a risk to be managed, but an opportunity to be realized. It calls for a shift from potential to delivery, from promise to construction. I am confident that this Indaba will help strengthen cooperation, but it will also serve to accelerate Africa's promise, a promise of a future where in the end, the current 1.4 billion people who live on this continent will have energy on an accelerated basis. As my sister was saying, 90 million every year or whatever. But I think Initiative 300 is precisely what will help a great deal by 2030 and an additional 300 by then, although the population will be growing. And we're looking at a population that will go to 2.4 billion in no time. And that is the challenge, and that is the opportunity that we have. You may remember that story of a US company that sent two of their salespeople to a country on the African continent. They were companies that made shoes. They sent their first representative, arrived on one of the countries on our continent, and saw the people walking barefoot. Went back to the United States and said, there is shoes. They sent another one, and he came back and said, boss, what an opportunity. They don't have shoes, but now that company started growing by providing shoes. Now, on our continent, we don't have electricity for 600 people. That is the opportunity. Not to be boastful. I end by saying, when the South African Democratic Government took over 30 years ago, 1994, only 54% or so of South Africans had electricity. Today, it has risen it to 93%. It saw that as a key task to make sure that those that did not have electricity must have electricity. So what did it see? It saw an opportunity, a great opportunity to improve the lives of South Africans. What has that yielded? It has yielded people, and the growth of our economy that is now standing in the years that are coming is going to be generated because of the commitment that was implemented some 30 years ago. So I think it is an absolute life-giving and